Hello everybody, welcome to another one of my tutorials. In this tutorial I'm going to try and show you how I made this game. Basically I'm pushing the up, left, down, right arrow keys on the keyboard, and my character is scrolling across what could be terrain data, but just to keep it simple, instead of drawing like bushes or paths, rocks, what have you, I'm just drawing rectangles, and wherever there is no data, then it's going to turn into just black nothingness. And just so you can see basically how this is working a little bit, let's look at the code. And right here is all of that map data. So if it's a 0, that's apparently a 1 or a red square. 0, 0, 1. Actually, I think that this row is actually this column. So 0, 0, 1, 1, 1, 1, 1, 1. Yeah. 2 reds, and then a whole crap load of grays. So let's get started with some more simple concepts. Basic shape drawing. In Khan Academy, you can use functions like rect to draw a rectangle, and it'll have a pop-up box telling you about these parameters. See, x is the x coordinate of the top left corner of the square. So if I wanted to draw a rectangle right here in the upper left corner of this screen, this is the point 0, 0, and y increases going down this way and x increases going this way. So this would be the point 100, 100. This would be the point 100, 0. This would be the point 0, 100. So if I want to put a rectangle in the upper left-hand corner, then those are the coordinates of that point, 0, 0. And then I can put width and height. That's just what you would think it would be, the lengths of the edges of the rectangle. And just to illustrate that, I'm going to put width as 100 and height as 10. So it's going to be an elongated rectangle, and there it is. Or I can use the slider bar and just change it till it looks how I kind of want it to look, you know. The next thing you need to be aware of is the fill function. And this function takes 3 numbers as arguments, and that just tells you the red and the green and the blue of the color that you want. And it has to be a number between 0 and 255. If you put a number greater than that, then it's just going to default to the 255. Or you can use the pop-up selector and just pick a color. So that's some basics of drawing here. And arrays, like as you saw, all of this data right here is inside of these square brackets, and that is the terminology for an array. So a very basic array would be something like this. Just some data that you want to store, and a very basic way to get at some of that data is to use the print function. And now this is the 0 index of this array. Basically all arrays start out with an index of 0, So to get at the boy, I need to remember that that is the 0, and then I use the square brackets again, and I put the index of the data element that I want in between the two square brackets. Nothing happened, but that is because there's two different functions, print and print line. Print line, I think, won't work without an argument. It's very strict about the number of arguments it receives. Boy. That's just because every time I update some of this code, it runs again and recompiles it. That's very handy because anytime you make an edit to your code, then you automatically see the results happening over here. It can be the source of some glitches, but for the most part, it's a really good thing. So if I wanted to look at the second element of the array, since the first element started out as the 0 index, the second element is the first index. So what's this one going to be? It's going to be the second index. 0, 1, 2 for first, second, and third. A lot of things in computer programming are that way, and they had their reasons when they did that. They didn't just do that just to make our lives hell, but I'll not go into that. So next up, for loops. This is an example of doing things the hard way. If I just want to look at everything in the basics array, what I can do is just use a loop to just pull everything out of there. And then it just automatically pulls everything out. Objects. Pretty much everything in JavaScript is an object, but if you want to do object-oriented programming, like for example, this boy is an object of type boy, and I used the new keyword to set aside memory that is just enough to make a whole new boy object. And then it goes up here and it finds the boy constructor, and it takes the numbers that I gave it, 500, 500, and then it gives this dot x, that value that's passed in, and it also creates a draw method and a move method for that object. The more methods you put in here, obviously, the more memory it's going to require. So that's why you create objects using the new keyword. So an example of a simple object. You write them out just like as if you're going to write a normal JavaScript function. And this is just going to be like a really overly complicated way of writing out some text. Maybe I should comment this out. This is how you do a multi-line comment. And show you how to make some text the easy way first. Easy is good, right? So nothing happens because I didn't set a fill color. So that's the easy way. Now let's do the exact same thing, but I'm going to want to set up a draw method for the simple objects, and it's basically going to be the same thing, so I can use some of this code. Those were single line comments if you didn't get that. But instead of displaying this hard-coded text that I put in there, I'm going to display this .text, meaning within the scope of this object, the text variable. So that's this thing that I set up here. So whenever I create a new set up a new variable, it's going to put that into this .text, and then this .text is what it displays. So to get that to display, I take my variable name and I use the dot operator, and I type out the method name. It looks like you're missing a semicolon. Where am I missing a semicolon? Right here. Okay. So there's the output. And so the beauty of objects is that you can set up as many of them as you want using the same template. So it might be good to have some other inputs in here. I might as well show you how to make an optional. This vertical bar is on the / key, and putting two of them means or. So I'm going to say if I get an input here, then I'm going to put that into this variable. If I don't get an input here, in other words, if y is undefined, which it would be by default if it doesn't receive any input, then I'm going to set this .y equal to 0. So it's just a conditional within the assignment, either what you gave me or this hard-coded value. And then text xy, so I'm going to add this .y to here. And now in one or the other, I can add a new parameter and say 100, for example. So hi, smiley face, jumped down 100 pixels because this got set. And this one, it's now, this .y is 0, so it's staying at the same place. Now if you wanted to add a third parameter, then you would pass in like null and then the third parameter, and then this one would get up in here, and then y would be null, and so it would skip over that and set it equal to 0. So here's another program. This one was a tutorial I designed to show people how to make multiple levels, and This is a variable that goes in and looks at the index of stored board. I set level equal to 0, so the 0 index. So it's going to look at this one and say that is the array that I want. This is an example of a two-dimensional array. Earlier when I was showing you just like the list of names, that's a one-dimensional array, but an array that has arrays within it is a two-dimensional array. So technically this is a three-dimensional array, which is getting kind of complicated, but I'm just unpacking these portions of the array into a variable. So this is the two-dimensional array, and then we just forget the complexity of the three-dimensional array, and we can have all of our levels stored up in one variable that we can use this variable to switch which one we're looking at. And here's an example of for loops in action. This is what you call a nested for loop. So every time the y variable changes, like y will start out at 0, and then this loop will go all the way through. So for every x in board y, and then it's going to look at the data that is passed into it. If it's a 0, for example, this element right here, then it'll set up a fill color, and otherwise it's going to set up a different fill color. So that's why you see two different colors here. And then it's going to draw rectangles, and it's going to scale the coordinates by 100 and draw them with a length of 100. Here is an event listener that looks for mouse clicks, and I'll let you guess what that logic does just by watching it. Yeah, it just switches which board we're looking at, and then draw sends the active board to the draw board function. So draw board was what we were looking at with the nested for loops, and it accepts a board variable, which is one of these two-dimensional arrays. See, the reason I like to use two-dimensional arrays for map objects is because it's exactly analogous to a two-dimensional space. This row vector, well, let's see, I don't know which one that is. Maybe this column. Anyways, each of these columns or rows or whatever is one of these vectors. And finally, we'll look at key events. So in this program, we set up a keys array, and this is a special variable that, for example, if I hit the left arrow, then it's going to be equal to capital L, capital E, capital F, capital T. So this guy right here. Look at the keys array. If the left key was pressed, then subtract 1 from the boy's x coordinate, which is what the draw depends on. This is a little bit tricky here. We want the coordinates of See, draw map is a function of the boy's coordinates, because I want to keep the boy centered at width divided by 2, height divided by 2. So it looks like everything's moving around him, but I'm just always going to be drawing him right in the center of the screen. So you can look at his draw, like 200 minus 25. Well, 25 is half of the width of the bitmap there. So that's fixed. So something's got to give. And it's the map that's got to give. In order to make this type of side scroller, I need to know where the boy's XY coordinates have moved to, so I can move the map in the opposite direction. So that's why I'm passing X and Y in, and I can't remember why I floored them into the integers and divided by the block width, but I remember the block width is the width of one of these blocks, and that's just a global variable that's up here, 100. It's always good to make these type of global variables, and if you use them, so that later on, if you decide you want to have more detail, have like a smaller block width, fit more things on the screen, then you can just change this. So let's look at these variables. This is just one big comment. So going into draw map, I've just set up 4 variables, and these 2 variables I remember have to do with the top left coordinates of the viewport, and a viewport is just what chunk of the screen we're going to draw, because you can imagine if this was a 1,000 by 1,000 array of map data, and the draw was just going to loop over that map data and try and draw all of that map data, like your game would just crash. So instead of looping over all of the map data, I take the boy's coordinates and I look at a coordinate just slightly up and to the left of him. So if there was hundreds of thousands of blocks way up there, none of them are going to get drawn. I'm just going to start drawing up here somewhere, and I'm going to go until 3 blocks beyond him down here somewhere. So my double for loop is going to do row, 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 or column, 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 however it's set up. I don't really worry about that in this basic of a program. In a real game, I would look at this in more detail and try to figure out which way was up and down, and whether I was actually X or Y, or I don't know. It's a little bit confusing, but practice makes perfect. This little bit of code is a little bit confusing, because if you've ever seen a switch case, you're feeding in some data into the switch, and then you're looking at like different cases. So feeding a conditional into the switch case, basically what that did for me is to check and see if these things are even defined. Otherwise it's going to throw an error and crash the program. So like this black space up here, that's not part of my map data. So it's just going to default to black. So yeah, it's going to loop over coordinates near the boy and then look at the map data there, and the parser that compiles this code is probably lazy. So by the time it gets to here, like, it's forgotten about this conditional. So this is the actual value that, like, it has to be. Like, this is a two-dimensional array that has coordinates I, j. Like, for this to be the case that it's looking at to decide the color, that's nonsensical. So this is the case, and that's just the so like if I equals 0, then that's this element. So then this entity right here altogether is another array. And then you're looking at the j element of this other thing. So that's how you can think about two-dimensional arrays. You go inside of the structure as a whole, and you take the index I, and that picks one of these arrays for you, 0, 1, 2, and then j goes along 0, 1, 2, and picks one of these elements. This draw each block from the viewport in the right location. I and j need to be multiplied by bw. So to get into the array, I had to divide by bw. Otherwise, like, x could be like 500, but like there's only like 10 elements here. But if you divide by 100, then, and this just rounds down. So this division might return like a, whoops. This division right here might return like a decimal, a floating point number. And then this makes sure that it's an integer, because you need to pass integers into your arrays. So since I had to divide in order to make this chunk of code work, now I need to multiply to bring it back out to the actual coordinates that the rectangle ought to be located at. And then these are just some translation terms of translating the map around the boy's coordinates. And I'm losing my voice, so I will end that tutorial if it'll let me.